What's up, guys? Welcome to another video. I'm Karnik Shah. This is my channel, Inflection Point Research. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that doesn't involve a sectoral or company deep dive. It's nothing to do with research, but it's something that many of us often don't pay attention to. So, in investing, there's three edges that humans have traditionally had. One is the informational edge, one is the analytical edge, and one is the behavioral edge. In this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about how the informational and analytical edges are not so relevant anymore and why the need to master behavioral edge is more relevant today where there's no other advantages that we have. So the informational edge is dead. 30 years ago, institutions who had access to all of the latest information had an advantage over retail investors like you and me. But today, with the internet in all its glory, with the access to reports and information and things like Vahan data, various sources of information, this edge has completely vanished for anyone. Then there was the analytical edge, the ability to crunch data better than anyone else, the ability to connect the dots faster than anyone else was the next frontier. Wall Street was famous for recruiting brilliant prodigies who they believed were like the next analytical geniuses. But now, with the rise of AI, with the advent of sophisticated algorithms and massive computing power, our ability to analyze a balance sheet or study companies is nothing compared to what a GPU and computers can do. So, this edge is also rapidly disappearing and will, if not already dead, will be dead soon. The good news is, well, it's good news and bad news, that the third edge, the behavioral edge, is something within us. It's something we can control. But like the father of value investing, Benjamin Graham himself said, the investor's chief problem and even his worst enemy is likely to be himself. What does this mean? If we can control our behavioral, if we can control our emotions and our temperament better than people around us, this can be something that will be an edge for us or an advantage. But if we give in to the worst of our emotions, if we're constantly drawn to market noise, this edge ends up being something that can be disadvantageous to us and can cause us financial peril. I want to illustrate my point about behavioral edge by talking about Odysseus. For whoever don't know his story, he was a famous Greek hero and a sailor whose crew had to sail past this island called the Island of the Sirens. Now, this island was infamous and notorious for drawing many a sailor towards it with its mesmerizing and seductive sounds, which would captivate the attention of sailors who would sail towards the island in greed. And on the way to the island, they would face disaster and shipwrecks, and none of them made the island. Now, Odysseus had heard about this and he wanted to hear the sounds, the mesmerizing sounds, but he obviously did not want to suffer the same fate as the other sailors. So, what he did was he instructed his crew to tie him to a mast and then subsequently fill their ears with beeswax so they couldn't hear anything that he said. And he told them, even if they did hear anything, to ignore whatever he said and just continue sailing. Now Odysseus's crew followed his instructions, and they were sailing past this island. Odysseus could hear these sirens, and he was captivated, and he was crying and pleading and begging his crew to sail towards the island. But because all their ears were filled with beeswax, they couldn't hear him. So Odysseus got to hear the sounds, but they sailed past the island safely. Why am I telling you this random story? It's because think of yourself as Odysseus and think of these sirens as market noise. All of these sirens are drawn to pull your attention, to tempt you, they're usually in the form of tips and noise of various sources. But you must be laser focused towards your own process and disregard the noise in order to safeguard yourself. Now let's talk about some famous biases that we would have all heard of. There's these ego biases, which is the confirmation bias, which is basically seeking information that already validates what we believe. So if we invested in a particular company, we'll just look for confirmational signs that this is a very good company. If someone or if we read something that goes against this belief, we tend to disregard it. The Dunning-Kruger effect is basically confusing luck for skill. It's tending to believe that your own edge and your own powers are a lot more than they actually are. This is very common with new investors who usually join during the peak of a bull market and they've performed very well, and they tend to mistaken this luck or the environment for their own skills. Then we have the social traps, which is herd mentality, which I'm sure everyone's heard of. The feeling the need to buy because everyone else is buying. Then there's conformity, which is basically the inability in humans or the difficulty we find in having a belief or a viewpoint that is different from everyone else. If we're in a room full of other fellow investors and they all believe one thing and you genuinely believe the other thing, you find it very difficult to speak out and voice your opinion because everyone else has the opposite belief. Then you have the valuation traps, which I'm sure all of us have experienced many a time. One is loss aversion, which is the pain of a loss feels twice as intense as the joy of a gain. We might have invested in two companies, and one we lost 100 rupees from the investment, and in the other we've gained 100 rupees. That loss will tend to stick in our head and bother us a lot more than the joy we've extracted from a gain of the same amount. Then is anchoring, which is basically fixating on the price that we've come across of a particular asset and not the current value and future growth prospects. Example, if you've seen a company maybe a year ago where the stock price was say 1,000 rupees and today it's available at 1,500 rupees, but there's a lot of tailwinds and growth prospects, we tend to maybe pass on it because we'll say, oh, we just came across this company a while back and it was available at 1,000 rupees and we didn't pull the trigger then, so you tend to avoid that company. Then is the recency bias, which is assuming that the current prevalent conditions will continue for a long time. If a company is not in favor, we tend to ignore it, not thinking that, okay, that there could be some point where the company's growth will inflect or there'll be a turnaround. Similarly, if a company's been doing well, we tend to just think that it'll continue doing well, not seeing that the problems that they might incur along the way. Now I'm going to talk about some examples and experiments. These are all from a report that was published by DSP Mutual Fund this week about behavioral investing. This report was very, very interesting, and I'll attach a link to it in this video. It's a must read for people who are more interested in this. So the first experiment I'm going to talk about is the Bavelas experiments. The point of this experiment was to say that sometimes simplicity is the best outcome. Just because something sounds very complex does not make it like a superior outcome. So this experiment was conducted by a Spanish scientist in which he had two subjects, one called Smith and one called Jones, and both of them were given a bunch of slides with cells and a microscope, and they had to identify which cells were healthy and which cells were sick. Now, Smith developed a very simplistic method, but he managed to achieve 80% accuracy with what he was doing. Jones, on the other hand, was told that he is wrong whenever Smith was right, and he is right whenever Smith was wrong, regardless of what he was doing. Because of this, Jones, in his own head, concocted a very elaborate and complex theory to justify his rationale for choosing and for making his decisions. At the end, when they both had to explain their logic, Smith gave his very simplistic explanation and Jones gave his explanation. And Smith himself, although Smith's accuracy was much higher, he thought that Jones's process was much, much superior to his because it sounded like it was it sounded like a very elaborate and complex theory. The moral is sometimes simplicity, and not sometimes, more often than not, simplicity is the right answer. Complexity in investing is usually like, not usually, but many a times, it's to mask something fragile or something that companies don't want you to see. The main lesson here is not to confuse complexity with insight. The second experiment was to show herd mentality and the need for conformity. So a person is basically chosen for an experiment along with two other computer players to play this game called Curveball. Now, this person doesn't know that the two other players he's playing with are computers. He thinks they're all human. And these computers, after a few rounds, start just tossing the ball among themselves and exclude the human. Now, when fMRI scans were conducted on this human, the scans showed that the dismay of being excluded from this game was the same as uh, like the same parts of the brain were activated as the parts that are activated during intense physical pain, like that of a broken bone. The lesson in this is that sometimes staying on the sidelines when everyone else is participating in a stock or everyone else is in the market and we're in cash, sometimes it can feel very distressful and painful. And we are hardwired to follow like the herd and to follow our peers. This kind of, if you think about it, this kind of explains the intense FOMO we feel when people are talking about a stock that we missed out on. But it's okay. Like it's normal to have these emotions, and that's why it's best to stay a little away from the noise and chatter that fills social media these days. These next two experiments are very interesting, and they're basically to show us that uh, when we're doing something, we feel like activity is achievement. These two experiments, one was conducted by Ellen Langer, in which she noticed that people demanded much more money to sell a lottery ticket in which they had selected the numbers versus people who had gotten lottery tickets with the numbers already pre-selected. The act of choosing numbers basically created an illusion of control. And although the odds are the same in both cases, people who actually chose their numbers thought they had like an edge. Similarly, in elevators, if you notice, a lot of elevators have a door open and door close button. And many times the door close button is not actually connected to anything and doesn't make the door close faster. But it's just designed to reduce the anxiety because it makes us feel like we're in control. The lessons here is activity doesn't equal achievement. Sometimes we just love to trade, tinker. If we've not done anything, we feel like we should buy or sell something. But sometimes just not doing anything is the most optimal course of action. So next story is a pretty interesting story in Cottingley, this place in the UK, in sometime just after the First World War in the 1910s and 1920s. These two girls had just gotten a camera, which was probably very novel at the time, and had gone to the riverside and taken these photos. And in these photos, it appeared like they had taken photos of what appeared to be fairies. Now, these photos had traveled across the UK and it was subject of much debate, and people were genuinely perplexed about these photos. And these photos Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's the brilliant creator of Sherlock Holmes, came across these photos. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believed that these photos were that of actual fairies, which caused everyone else around them thinking that if someone with such a high IQ and someone who's so brilliant has believed or is convinced that these are fairies, that they are probably fairies. But then a while later, these girls admitted that they had basically, from paper cuttings, had cut out like fairy shaped things and taken photos of them. Now, why did someone so brilliant like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believe that these were fairies? He lost his son during the First World War, and he wanted to believe in another world, in the spirit world, because of the pain of this loss. And this caused him to basically not go along, but to genuinely believe that what these girls were saying was true because it's what his mind wanted him to believe. His intelligence didn't help him find the truth, it just helped him invent better arguments for this lie or for this fiction that these girls had created. What's the lesson here? The lesson is that high IQ doesn't make you more rational. Most of the times, it just makes you a better lawyer for what your existing beliefs already were. The next example will be that of information overload from the Joseph Skitz study of 1965. So here, psychologists were given patients' life history in 4 installments and were made to make judgments. As they kept receiving more information, their accuracy was more or less the same, but their confidence skyrocketed. What is the lesson here? That more information does not necessarily mean more accuracy. It just creates an illusion of knowledge, which causes our confidence to skyrocket, but our accuracy to more or less stay the same at status quo. The next experiment were experiments conducted on Capuchin monkeys, in which two monkeys were in a room and were given tasks to do and kept receiving cucumbers as a reward for their task. After a certain round, one monkey continued getting a cucumber while the other monkey got a grape, which the monkeys thought was a better reward. The monkey who got the cucumber started protesting, went berserk, started throwing the cucumber, started protesting, started not performing or behaving correctly. The lesson here is that comparison is the thief of joy. Sometimes, even though a stock might be giving us a solid 10% or 15%, but when a friend gets 100% returns on like a meme stock, it it really bothers us. Like we forget our own gains and we just look at what we've lost out on. This FOMO drives a lot of irrational risk taking in humans. So, what can we do? We must be like Odysseus. We must tie ourselves to a mast, metaphorically, in order to survive in this world of investing. We can't avoid market noise, we can't eliminate our biases, but we can prevent ourselves from acting upon them with the help of a crew and a mast, which we will discuss now. How can we be like Odysseus? How can we get a mast? These are basically guardrails that we can use to protect us from ourselves. One thing can be automating our decisions in a very methodological way. This can be something like just doing monthly SIPs in high quality companies or monthly SIPs in ETFs or index funds. It can even be something like having a technical rule based system for exiting a particular company with broken 200-day moving average. This basically prevents us from making choices when we are emotional. Second thing to do is conduct a pre-mortem. Have a very strong, either a friend or within yourself, do like an antithesis towards your thesis. Find holes in what you believe in terms of when you're assessing a company for investment. Always invert in the famous and great Charlie Munger's words. And the third and most important thing is define your own game. Anchor yourself to your own goals, have your own systems and processes, and don't get distracted by the noise of other people's returns. This basically further tells us how we can automate and how we can conduct a pre-mortem. With automate, the basic goal is to make less decisions when we're emotional. And either we control our emotions really well or we find a way to make decisions that are automated or rules based. How to conduct a pre-mortem is basically when you're buying a company, write down that what could have gone wrong. Like think that it's 1 year ahead and think of all the things that could have gone wrong in the company. Also, you can also do write down two particular scenarios or conditions in which you would be forced to sell your position in this company no matter what. This helps us basically invert or develop a strong antithesis case. Lastly, play your own game. This quote is a very nice and relevant quote, but is not applicable to anyone who's serious about investing. But yeah, anchor yourself to your own objectives, to your own goals, to your own processes, and just don't get swayed in any way by other people's returns. You have to stay in for the long haul and not be mesmerized by the sounds of the sirens, if you will. Yeah, we'll end today's video with this message. Winning in investing isn't about being smarter than everyone else. It's about building systems and processes that protect you from being human. I hope you guys learned something of value in today's video. I'd be very happy with any comments or feedback that you have for me. This is a new channel for me and it's something I'm doing stepping out of my comfort zone. So I really appreciate your support and your viewership. Thank you.